I will call this meeting to order. It's the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Public Works Committee. I'm Councilman Reich. I chair the committee. I'm joined by my colleagues, Council members Johnson, Palmisano, Fletcher, and Gordon. We are a quorum, and we'll proceed with today's agenda, which has 7 items, 2 of which are discussion, the remainder are consent. I'll go through the consent items. Any council member can pull them for further deliberation if they wish. Item 1 is the contract amendment with Land Bridge Ecological for Nicollet Mall Reconstruction Planting Project. Item 2 is the North Loop Paving Street Reconstruction Project, and it's a reduction of the assessment at 505 3rd Street North. Item 3 is the Broadway Street Northeast Street Reconstruction Project. It's a legal settlement and a reduction of assessment for 2608 Broadway. Details are listed. Item 4 is a temporary construction easement with Hennepin County for Fremont Avenue South Bridge over the Midtown Greenway. Item 5 is the bid for construction, concrete sidewalks, curb and gutter, alleys, and drive approaches. Amount is listed. Anyone wish to pull any item from consent? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. We can move to the 2 discussion items, beginning with item 6, the Minneapolis Vision Zero crash study. Good morning, Director Hutchinson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am very pleased to introduce this next item, which is the Vision Zero crash study. This is very important data that we need in order to keep moving ahead with the Vision Zero action plan. This will provide a basis for our future work. I also want to take a moment to recognize the council members sitting here today who have continuously supported, not just supported, but helped to create the Vision Zero policy. Several of you were authors of the resolution that has been adopted that is the foundation of the work, and it showed tremendous leadership, and we're very pleased to keep you informed with discussion items as our work progresses. So thank you so much for your leadership. I also want to recognize the staff who have been plugging away at this for the last year and a half, and we are finally in a place to be able to report back on really meaningful information and data. And I also, third, want to recognize that though they're not in the room today, we have convened quarterly a task force of city department heads who show up to meetings, participate in discussions, and are extremely active in this work from a citywide perspective. We could not ask for a better team within the city. With that, I will introduce Kathleen Mayel, and there's one of them now. Thank you, David Frank, for being here to support us today. I will ask Kathleen Mayel to present on this item. Kathleen is a manager in the Transportation Planning and Programming Division. I think you know her well. You'll be seeing her quite a bit.
Good morning, committee chair, council members. I'm Kathleen Mayel, Transportation Supervisor, Transportation Planner in the Transportation Planning and Programming Division of Public Works. And I'm happy to start off our presentation on the Vision Zero crash study. I'll give a little bit of context for the study. Steve Mosing will come in and detail out some of the key crash study information, and I will end by putting this within the larger context of the next steps for our city's Vision Zero efforts. The commitment to Vision Zero started in 2017 when the council adopted a resolution really stating the goal of 0 deaths by 2027. This is really showing a commitment to life and opportunity for all people in Minneapolis and acknowledging that the numbers on this slide are too many and we can do something about it. Since then, we've finalized a pedestrian crash study and presented that to council. Funding was approved for the Vision Zero program coordinator, as well as funding to enlist a consultant to help with this current crash study and Vision Zero action plan. The task force was started. This is the group that Director Hutchison just mentioned, 11 different department heads throughout the city involved in making this a reality. They've been meeting continuously since then. This summer, we started initial engagement at open streets and different events throughout the city, asking people what their best ideas were for making our streets safer, and you'll see some images throughout the presentation of ideas people have had in the community. We've hired a Vision Zero program coordinator, Ethan Fowley, who unfortunately could not be here today to help present. And we've also selected a consultant to help us develop our action plan. We finalized our crash study a couple months ago, which we are presenting on right now. And then we have started the work of different advisory committees, a technical advisory committee, as well as a Vision Zero advisory committee, partnering with others throughout the city, other organizations, advocacy groups, partnering agencies, and such. And really where we're at right now, this brings us to today, where we're launching into a next phase of engagement. We've got a really solid set of data to lay the groundwork for this work moving forward. And this will lead us to producing a draft action plan later this year and then coming to finalize it next year. So the Vision Zero crash study really is a parallel document to the pedestrian crash study. This crash study focuses on vehicles and bicycles. And where appropriate in our findings, we've tried to mesh the three together to give a full story and narrative about what is happening with crashes in our city. This really builds off several initiatives that we through the years have worked on to highlight safety. Our Safe Routes program, our master plans for bicycling, and our Complete Streets policy, how we've integrated safety as a key component of our methodology for the 20-year streets funding plan, and our stated Vision Zero commitment. So with that, I'll hand it over to Steve Mosing.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Steve Mosing. I'm the Traffic Operations Engineer for Public Works, and I'm going to go through a lot of data indicating the highlights of the Vision Zero crash study. So we finished the pedestrian crash study in 2017, and what this Vision Zero crash study is going to do, it's going to focus more on the the bicycle and vehicle crashes, better understand the trends and contributing factors to crashes and where, how, and why vehicle crashes are occurring and bicycle crashes are occurring. So the vast amount of the data is included within the study itself, but there are some data sets that we did not include, and those would be things like parking lot crashes and crashes on the freeway. So first, we can take a look at national trends. On the left is a bar chart that includes bicycle injury and bicycle fatality crashes. On the right is vehicle injury and vehicle fatality crashes. So you can see in both charts over the last 5, 6 or so years, you can see a steady increase in the fatality portion, and that's the blue chart portion of crashes. And we hit vehicle crashes, if you look at the beginning year of 1988, and go to the end, you see an overall reduction. Bike crashes kind of stays the same as far as injuries go. As far as fatality goes. Again, with the injuries, bicycles somewhat level the last few years, and with vehicles going up a little bit. So Minnesota crash trends, somewhat similar to what the national trends are. We hit a low point in 2012, and again, this is total crashes in the state of Minnesota, but have been steadily creeping upward over the last few years.
Director Mosing, I have a question from the DOC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious on the last slide, as I was looking at those numbers, are those, it looks like just total numbers. Do those numbers look similar when you average them out based off of the number of vehicle miles traveled, the number of bicyclists out there? I'm just wondering, as I see things like bicyclist fatalities going up, but the injuries going down, are we seeing more bicyclists out there? And so might that have something to do with it? Or is it getting more dangerous out there for bicyclists?
So from a national standpoint, we can try to look at that question. As I get into the presentation, we can look more localized, because I think we have a few answers to your questions with regard to that. I would say definitely there's more bicyclists out there, and so I would say it's a win if we have more bicyclists out there and bicycle injuries are going down, but again, then bicycle fatalities are going up. So good question. Nationally, I'll try to get that information, but later on in the presentation, we take a look at the trips versus the crashes.
I appreciate that. And yeah, just thinking proportionately to the number of people out there and things like that. So yep. Hopefully it's going down as more people are biking. Hopefully your risk of fatalities and injuries are going down as well with improvements.
Yeah, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but from using bike as a mode of operation, it's stayed fairly steady, and that would include the increase in bicycling that has occurred in the city. So Minnesota crash trends similar to national crash trends, where we hit a low point in 2012, but they've been steadily increasing since, and this is total crashes. So as far as the city of Minneapolis in correlation with other city and with the state and with the metro area, Minneapolis faring pretty well on traffic fatalities per 100,000 population as it compares to the country and the state. However, Minneapolis slightly higher than the metro as a whole in traffic fatalities per 100,000 people, and higher than St. Paul and New York City. So this breaks the crashes down by mode. The green represents vehicle crashes, blue bicycle crashes, and then the dark gray pedestrian crashes. I think bicycle and vehicle somewhat consistent over the last number of years, but we have been seeing an increase in pedestrian crashes, and this would include pedestrian, bicycle, and motor vehicle severe and fatality crashes.
My question is on the last slide. So I know every once in a while there's something like a bicyclist hitting a pedestrian or a train crash or something, but are most of these crashes involving at least one motor vehicle and then additionally a pedestrian or a bicyclist? Is that how the numbers?
Yeah, that's Councilmember Bender, that is correct. Most, if not, I would say a very, very, very high percentage of these crashes include at least one vehicle. So when I say pedestrian crashes, it's usually a pedestrian crash with a vehicle. When I say bike crash, it's usually a bike crash with a vehicle. And then the motor vehicle is a motor vehicle to motor vehicle crash or a fixed object crash. So this is the last slide broken down into percentages. So if you look at this, the green line represents, and this is percentage of each mode of fatal and severe crashes. So the green line represents vehicles, the dark gray represents pedestrians, and the bicycles are represented by blue. So if you look at the last year, out of all the severe and fatal crashes in the city, 53% of those were vehicles, 35% of those were pedestrians, and 12% of those were bikes. So you can see the bike or the pedestrians is what's somewhat increasing. Bikes have stayed somewhat steady. Pedestrians are the most vulnerable. So when we get into the different modes of travel, I'll start with the top of motor vehicle crashes. Out of all the motor vehicle crashes, just motor vehicle crashes, 1% result in a severe injury or a fatality. For bicycles, if you consider all bicycle crashes, 5% result in a severe injury or fatality. And for pedestrians, 11% of all pedestrian crashes result in a severe injury or a fatality. Bicycles and pedestrians are overrepresented in crashes. So this, Councilmember Andrew Johnson, this gets into your question. You can look at the first one. The green is the percentage of trips taken. So if you add up all the green charts there, it should add up to 100%. So of those, automobiles take almost 70% of those trips. But as far as severe injury and fatal crashes go, it's less than 60%, somewhere around 55%. So underrepresented. But if you get into pedestrians and bicycles, pedestrians, almost 20% of the trips they take, but they include almost 30% of the fatal and severe injury crashes. And then with bicycles, about 5% of the trips and over 15% of the fatal injury and crashes. Speed is a significant factor. I'll have a few slides on speed here. So if you take a look at all the green bars here, they represent the mileage on our roadway. So for instance, if you look at the first set of bar charts, 7% of our roadway system consists of speed limits 25 miles or less. So again, this is speed limits. And if you look at the corresponding charts next to that, vehicle crashes and bike crashes represent 3% and 2% of crashes on that roadway. So this particular roadway under 25 miles an hour is underrepresented. If you skip over to 35 miles per hour, you can see that it's 1% of the total mileage roadways within the city, but they represent 7 and 6% of pet and vehicle crashes. So overrepresented there. So I guess the point of this slide is to indicate that speed does play a role in crashes. I should say speed limit plays a role in crashes. This is a slide from the pedestrian crash study, somewhat of the same type of trend. Greater the speed, the more severe and fatal crashes you have. And this is just of pedestrian crashes. This is a slide from the Denver's Vision Zero action plan. Same as the previous slides, the higher the speeds, the likelihood of a pedestrian being have a fatality or severe injury increases. So where do crashes happen? Well, most crashes happen at intersections, and that's just the same as it was for pedestrians as well. So if you look at the right chart, that shows our breakdown of our intersections in the city of Minneapolis and what traffic control device exists at those intersections. So if you go to the right bar chart to the left bar chart, the left bar chart shows the number of crashes at those certain types of intersections. So for signalized intersections, it's a little over 10% of our intersections in the city of Minneapolis, but they represent almost 55% of the total crashes in the city. What is somewhat indicative of this is that a lot of multimodal existence occurs at signalized intersections, which means more conflicts. So there is some logic to why signalized intersections have the most crashes, but it is the most robust control we have. So pre-crash maneuvers.
Director Mosing, on the last slide, is this to say that if there is other or no control at an intersection in Minneapolis, that actually isn't even represented in crashes, meaning that there haven't been any crashes at those uncontrolled intersections?
I wouldn't, Councilmember Palmisano, I wouldn't necessarily that there's been no crashes, but maybe crashes where there's not a significant, or there's not an amount of them that would be represented by a percentage.
I see. Okay, thanks.
So pre-crash maneuvers, and again, Councilmember Bender, you asked this question a little bit about all the crashes include a vehicle, a motor vehicle of some sort. What are these motor vehicles doing prior to the crash? Well, if you look at the top bar chart, which is associated with pedestrian crashes only, over half of the vehicles were making a turn of some sort, either a left or right turn. And on the bottom bar pie chart, you can look at bicycle crashes. It's over 60% of cars are making some type of turn, a left or right turn, prior to impact with the pedestrian or the bicyclist. So turning vehicles definitely one of the pre-crash maneuvers that we're looking at. So we take a look at a lot of raw traffic statistics. And so to place this into demographics, we have our bar charts here. So if you look at the green bar charts, that represents the percentage of population in the city of Minneapolis. And if you specifically look at Native Americans as crashes, they represent less than 1% of the crashes, but represent close to 10% of fatal vehicle crashes and fatal bicycle and pedestrian crashes.
Quick question, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we just clarify, Director Mosing, when we're identifying who's involved in the traffic fatality, are we talking about the demographic background of the driver who causes the crash? Are we talking about the demographic background of the victim of the crash? What are we to interpret from this data?
So thank you, Councilmember Fletcher. Good question. This is the actual victim of the crash. One thing also to keep in mind is that these statistics are not kept by the city of Minneapolis. They're kept by the National Federal Highway, I believe. So this data does come from a national level, as we don't keep that type of specificity with our types of crashes here. But yes, it's the victim of the crash is where this falls into. So ACP 50
I
areas.
guess we have another question. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe this slide is actually, when I saw what you were moving on to, maybe that helps answer the question, but I'm wondering, under the category of American Indian, why there would be such a disparity. Is there any theory? Is this that based off of the demographics of neighborhoods, that there's been less investment, for instance, in safe infrastructure there, or that the roads are overly congested, or those sort of things, and that's where we're seeing this end result in terms of the racial disparities showing up in traffic fatalities?
Councilmember Johnson, I think it might be all of the above possibly, and we haven't looked into it in that great of detail. We're trying to get a gauge of where we're at in the city and what our focus points should be with the Vision Zero crash study. And as you mentioned, the next slide may answer that question a little bit more.
Sure, and I just throw out there, I think it would be helpful to engage with these communities, especially if we're seeing such a stark disparity showing up in the crashes and fatal accidents.
So ACP 50 locations and areas, again, 40% of the crashes, but only 31% of the population. So we took a little deeper dive into the crash data to establish where the crashes were happening and the areas where they were happening. Again, 40% of the crashes, but only 31% of the population, ACP 50s. So age and fatal and severe crashes, again, by age group here. So there's a couple age groups here that actually are in reverse of what the national trends are showing, in a good way, actually. So if you look at the under 18 category, the green dots represent the percentage of that particular population age group. If you look at under 18, that is underrepresented as far as pedestrian fatal and severe crashes, bicycle fatal and severe crashes, and vehicle fatal and severe crashes. So that's somewhat not in the same trend mode as what the national statistics are telling us. And if you go all the way to the other end of the bar chart, 65 and over, same thing, where we're underrepresented as far as population when it comes to pedestrian or bicycle and vehicle crashes. So this is not following the national trends. So this is a good thing in the city of Minneapolis, is that they're underrepresented in both those categories. Otherwise, the other age categories somewhat follow the national trends. So next few slides talk about where these crashes are occurring on our street network. So first we'll start with motor vehicle crashes.
Director Mosen, you have a question?
Sorry, it looks like people under the age of 18 are overrepresented. Oh no, I see. Okay, thank you. I see the little dot. I'm good.
Yeah.
I was surprised you didn't highlight that, but now I see why not, because I'm wrong. We're good. Excellent work.
So the next few slides we'll talk about where crashes are occurring. So we'll start with motor vehicle crashes. So and this is all crashes. So 62% of crashes occur on 6% of the streets. So like Kathleen mentioned, this Vision Zero study gives us a focus on where to go to make improvements. Vehicles, so this is the motor vehicle high injury network. So 63% of fatal and severe crashes occur on 4% of the streets. So the difference from the last slide to this slide is the last slide was total crashes. This slide is just severe and fatal crashes. I'll switch to pedestrian crashes. 80% of all crashes occur on 10% of the streets. And again, that's all pedestrian crashes. 75% of major ped crashes, and that's fatal and severe crashes, occur on 5% of the street. So again, it nails reduces our focus to these specific streets. Bicycle crash concentration corridors. So this is all bicycle crashes. 53% of crashes occur on 4% of the streets.
Oh, we have a question. Councilmember Palmisano.
Sorry to stop you. On that slide, there's quite a few streets highlighted there, and it says the 2017 pedestrian crash study, but is that all data from 2017, or is that like a 5-year span?
No, so yeah, this slide does come from Councilmember Palmisano. This slide does come from the pedestrian crash study and includes pedestrian crashes through 2016.
I see. So this map represents 2016 data only then? Or 2016?
Yeah, this map represents 10 years of crash with the last year being up to
Okay.
2016.
Yeah.
My apologies, I probably
Got it.
should have mentioned that.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
So bicycle crash concentration corridors, again, this is all bicycle crashes, and this is the 10-year data set, with 2016 being the last year. 53% of crashes occur on 4% of the streets. And the bicycle high injury network, so this slide would include severe and fatal crashes. 81% of fatal and severe crashes occur on 3% of the streets. So compiling all crashes, all modes of crashes, bicycle, ped, and motor vehicle crashes, 36% of all crashes happen on 2% of the streets. And if you break it down into high injury network, that's all crashes, bicycle, peds, and motor vehicles. 15% of crashes occur on 1% of the streets, and this is all severe and fatal crashes. And there's a handful of streets that are shown here that are represented on all the previous slides. So part of the bicycle, part of the ped, and also part of the motor vehicle. And so of these streets, a number of them have the 4-lane undivided means to operate it. So again, another focus point as these streets, this handful of streets that fall into every category, what we need to look at as far as future designs when it comes to mitigating crashes.
We have a question, Councilmember Gordon.
Just related to this in the previous map that I think mentioned at least Franklin Avenue. I think we had some streets that during the course of the study period went from 4 to 3, and it would be interesting to see if that had any positive impact if we're trying to build the case that having 4 might be, which that last slide clearly was indicating to me that we're you're looking at the 4-lane. That would be helpful anyway to build that case. Did we track that much at all?
Councilmember Gordon, good point. And with the amount of data that we analyzed and the 10-year segments that we analyzed, we did not break it down between when that street, because you're exactly right. Some of these streets did go from a 4-lane to 3-lane conversion, Franklin being one of them. We didn't break out the data to see the before and after of that particular reduction from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. But we can do that very easily.
Might be something to look at in the next phase. I'd also say look at some of the problematic intersections, because we may have made some changes that we thought would help with throughput or maybe help with safety. But I think it would be nice to see if any of the changes to the roads or else signals at intersections had a negative or positive impact on injuries.
Yes, Councilmember Gordon, a good point. And, since I've been here with the city, we constantly attempt to make improvements to mitigate crashes along the way. And there's been so many improvements that we have made to this point so far, and they fall into that 10-year time frame by which we have compiled this data. So maybe not only Franklin, but maybe we can reach out to some of the other key arterial roadways with the city and or intersections to see where the breaking point for that is and to get a before after.
Mr. Chair, if I might add to this answer, we also have started collecting before and after data of each of our street, whether it's reconstruction or resurfacing when we've reconfigured, and we have a more formalized program now that looks at a variety of factors of before and after. It's less immediate. Crash data takes a few years to be valid, but you should begin to see some of those before and after studies coming in the next year or so on projects that we've completed over the last year or so.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's very helpful. I wanted to point out that a number of these, at least the ones in Ward 10, are county roads. And I know that my constituents often contact my office about Lake Street, Lyndale, and Franklin Avenue, and get frustrated when they hear, well, that's a county road. And then they contact the county, and at least what I hear back is people feel like the county is saying, well, you have to contact the city, and they just feel like they get pointed back and forth. And while it's true that those roads are owned and operated by the county, I feel like it's our responsibility to make sure our constituents are safe. And when people lose their loved one, they don't really care whose jurisdiction the road was under. And so I'm really glad that we are taking this comprehensive look at our city, and that we need to be leaders in making sure that people are safe in all of the roads within the boundaries of our city. And that means having a strong partnership with the county, of course, and NDOT and the other operators. But, I just want to note that I think we have to stop saying, well, that's a county road, there's not a lot we can do, and just really take it to the next level and making sure that all of those streets are safe.
Again, with the 4-lane undivided street, of those handful of streets that are on every category of the different modes of crash concentrations, a number of those are 4-lane undivided streets. So again, something to work on and look at as far as future designs on those streets.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you. I think just to reiterate the sense of challenge of really doing something about this, right? One of the roads that's marked here is Central Avenue, and this is something that Councilmember Wright and I have met about to talk with the Bicycle Advisory Committee and some of the folks who have been really advocating for safety over there to think about a 4-to-3, and it somehow doesn't feel like that conversation's moving, right? I mean, we've got MnDOT at the table in terms of thinking about the 3rd Avenue reconstruction. We've got a moment when that road is getting reconstructed. And it just feels a little bit like we either aren't prioritizing this or aren't able to get our partners to prioritize this. I'm not entirely sure what the dynamic is, but we have opportunities where there are 4 lanes where there is reconstruction happening, and I don't see us changing this. So how do we kickstart this and make this more of a priority?
Mr. Chair, Steve and I are having a conversation with our eyes right now, and I'm going to jump in here and answer Councilmember Fletcher's conversation by saying that this is really difficult work. I have to start by saying that across the country, mostly in cities where this is being prioritized, it's very difficult work, and it requires first a commitment to ourselves to continuously make the right decisions for safety, and it requires a commitment to our partners, not just to forcefully encourage them, but to help them understand the problem, know that they have a stake in the problem, and be part of a solution provider. The other thing I will say is one of the reasons this is such difficult work is that we have so many tools in our toolbox, and there are occasions when the tool we really want to apply may not be possible to apply. So we have to look at every other tool that is available to us. I am confident that we have a very, progressive is like the wrong word, but a very progressive, it's so much more than progressive. It's a commitment to life and safety on the part of our teams working on this. And we have our chief traffic engineer giving us data that will underpin all of our future actions, that will highlight how we need to change the problem. That's not as common as you might think in cities. So I'm taking a moment here to recognize that this is very difficult work, and this study will help us double down and refocus and put our efforts at the top in the places where we can make the biggest difference.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
I guess I just want to emphasize that. I think this information is really critically important. I think what our best weapon will be is if we can actually bring facts and the truth to something. So we need to be convinced and know and be able to collect the evidence and say going from 4 to 3 led to these results. It saved lives, or we made these changes. It would. So and I think that will help us. And the same thing if we think lowering speed limit is the way to go. Well, we should have find some evidence to make our case and build our case and get public support for it, and the other jurisdictions will certainly follow. And that way we'll also know that we're actually using the right tools in the right situation. So we'll have confidence ourselves that it's a good decision too. So I think this is a great step and we're moving in a good direction.
All right, I believe I turn it back to Kathleen to finish up the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask one more detailed question then, Mr. Chair? Thank you. This had to do with what we call a signalized intersection, so I'm particularly curious about when less than full signalized, when there's a stop sign, when there's a crosswalk. We debate and we talk about, do we think putting in the stop sign will make it a false sense of security for pedestrians? Should we stripe this crossing without a stop sign? What's that going to do? What about if we put in yellow pedestrian signs? Will that actually make a difference? What about flashing lights? And I'm just wondering if we've got any evidence here that crashes went up or down with any of these particular treatments. We have mid-block pedestrian crossings in some places. Have we had fatalities there? Were there accidents there before we put them in? I'm just wondering, do we have any evidence that drills down into that?
Councilmember Gordon, as it pertains to improvements on the roadway network, specifically full traffic signal systems, we do have that kind of data. You know, I guess generally it does show, and we haven't put a lot of new signals in Minneapolis since I've been here. We have about 810 signals. We do have a little bit of data that show the results of what we do at a signal when it becomes a new signal as opposed to not being a signal, and also when we've made improvements to that signal. With regard to our flasher systems or other crosswalks, the amount of data that we can compile, I'll say, is statistically sometimes hard to conclude because the crashes are so infrequent, and I'm mainly talking about pedestrian crashes, so it's hard to conclude something. So you need a lot of data, and that's what we're trying to do, is get a lot of data. We took the 10-year data set and see how that folds into some of the improvements that we made. We haven't dug into the details of that with this Vision Zero crash study, but based on your last comment with regard to improvements from 4 to 3 and things like that, we can with that 10-year data set and dates and times when, or dates when these systems went in, and see if there's actual improvement. The challenge with that from a general standpoint is there's just wasn't enough data for us to conclude anything, and now we have that data.
Okay, it would be curious to see what the situations were on some of those outlying pedestrian fatalities, for example, because and I think it might be unfortunate if we drill down on these corridors. I don't know what you want to call the priority corridors we've identified here, and we didn't fix something that maybe had happened only once, but a similar situation in 8 different places on the outskirts of the city. So that's all I'm thinking about. And some of the things we've done, like the Cedar Avenue at 5th Street pedestrian flashing light crossing that we put in there. There's other things, and were there accidents beforehand and now there aren't any? Did it make things better or worse? And you don't have to answer this last little speech, but I just wanted to add a little bit of clarity to what I was after. Thanks.
Thank you. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a comment too, so feel free to respond or not. But a lot of us on this committee represent parts of the city that are growing and where we have said that we want to concentrate growth in the future. And I think I will go as far as to say it's irresponsible for the city to do that without the safety improvements that will keep our current and future constituents safe. Because if, there's an iterative result. So if people try walking in their community and feel terrified and unsafe, or know someone who got hit by a car or got hit by a car themselves, they're not going to walk when they have another choice. So many of our constituents don't have a choice, but those that do will choose to drive. And so when you add hundreds or thousands of new people, and therefore thousands and thousands of new trips into a neighborhood that's already densely populated and it's unsafe to bike or walk, people will drive. And so you've made our streets even less safe for those people who don't have a choice or who are choosing to walk and bike. So I think it is our responsibility as a city, when we are creating neighborhoods where we're adding significant population over a very short period of time to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to make sure that people feel safe to get around. And from there, to meet all of the other goals that led to us wanting to concentrate our population along transit corridors in the first place, climate change goals, health goals, livability goals that lead us to want people to feel safe and be able to choose to walk and bike and take transit. But I know for a lot of my constituents, they don't feel safe. And up until very recently, when housing costs started going up so quickly that now we hear the most about that, the number one reason that people call my office is speeding traffic on their streets. And it's a value choice. Is it going to take 3 more minutes to drive to work or wherever versus do people feel safe in their community? Are they able to actually make these choices for real? So I think this plan is so important to not only our transportation goals, but all of those collective goals and making sure that people, that we're being responsible as a public entity in creating neighborhoods that people feel safe in and are safe in and want to be in.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this presentation. I want to sort of add to a sense of urgency and express something that I've heard from a lot of my constituents when we've gone to talk to them about proposals for safety implementation, some of which are happening, some of which aren't happening because we decided it wasn't warranted. Relying on crash data is a really frustrating message to send to our constituents, that we have to wait for someone to die or get seriously injured to take seriously that we need to make improvements in some of these areas. And I think that there are a lot of places that we know people feel unsafe, that we haven't happened, knock on wood, to have that kind of accident yet. And I don't want to wait for that. I want us to be thinking about this if we're serious about Vision Zero. And so I guess it's both. I'm glad that we're looking at the crash data because this in many ways does represent the most urgent data. In many ways, it also just represents which streets have the most traffic on them, because if you have enough cars moving, you're going to have more conflict and more crashes. I mean, that makes a certain amount of sense, but then it doesn't speak to roads that are a little less traveled but still have significant design and control issues that make them unsafe. And so I want to just express that crash data is a starting point, but I really hope that we get a lot further in thinking about the safety of every street and making sure that everybody gets to feel safe walking around their neighborhoods. And there are a bunch of places that are unaddressed by this. But speaking of the places that are addressed by this, some of the hot spots in my ward are. And I guess I'm curious how. I don't feel like there's a lot of new information here. Most of us could have kind of drawn this map, and I assume most city staff probably could have too. And so I guess I'm wondering how much we've looked at, how much our current CIP, how much the current CLIC process reflects investments in what we already knew needed to happen. How much have we looked at how we're aligned in terms of our current capital investment, or do we have significant work that needs to be done to shift our investment to reflect this report and to reflect what we've learned about where crashes are occurring?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, I'll answer from over here. I think you are correct in that some of this information is information that we had and that we knew. There is other data that was presented through this study that highlights some things that we did not know. For example, the disproportionality on certain sectors of the population, which is new information and extremely important information as we move forward with the action plan, which brings me to the second point. We are at the finish of our presentation of base data and only at the start of our process of developing an action plan. And that action plan will include a detailed review of how we have been investing and if we need to shift or modify the investments moving forward, which you will see in the next proposal of capital. So a key component of this action plan is beyond the engagement process that we plan to do that we know goes well beyond what we collect in data. We need to hear from people we know. It will also do a review of our investment and really aligning how we're investing to bring these numbers down.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to echo what my colleagues have already brought up on this. And I just wanted to put that out there to add voice to it and recognize it, that as a policymaker, it is very challenging when we have residents who will come to us year after year after year, and they say, this area is a problem intersection. We really need help here. People are speeding too fast on our roads. We really need help here. And when we have this local on-the-ground wisdom from constituents who know when there are intersections or roads that stand out, and yet we keep going back to crash data saying, we can't do anything here. This isn't recommended here. Or when we have people speeding, we say, well, maybe we could put up another speed limit sign here. And or we have to explain to them, hey, here's how the click process works, and it's 5 years, and there's all these other competing things. And so it's really probably not going to get in there even in the next 5 years. And so this may just be the speed of government, especially around traffic-related infrastructure and our infrastructure and the extreme costs with it, and the need to go through these processes and make sure that when we're making investments, we're doing it right and it's based on data. But I want to put that out there because it's a frequent issue and concern and feeling that I'm getting related to this, and that I hear the frustration expressed from constituents who say, here's a problem area, and it's taking, and we keep coming back, and it just seems like there's no quick solution, and it's something that is going to take, it's more on the scale of 5 years, 10 years, 15 plus years before we're actually going to see a significant change here at this specific spot. But I also want to give credit to Public Works as well for your willingness to work with community around piloting projects as well. I've seen, for instance, bollard projects where Public Works has worked very rapidly to put in changes to try to improve crossings and things like that, and it's been noticed by constituents, and that's been appreciated as well. So there's kind of this duality that exists out there where in a lot of cases it feels like, sorry, we can't really do anything anytime soon at this intersection. We know it's a problem, but there's not a click item coming through anytime soon. There's not really anything we can do here. The data doesn't support any significant changes. But in other areas, we're saying, we're thinking creatively outside the box, and we're trying to make improvements here. So I wanted to name that and voice that because it's something that I know is shared by a lot of constituents, and I've still wrapped my head around what's the right answer for that, and how do we work to be more nimble and quick and responsive when we recognize that there is a shared sense of urgency and concern around particular areas within the community.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief, but I did want to just lift up that, we're reacting to decades of our streets being designed for cars to drive quickly through our neighborhoods. And we just adopted our complete streets policy 4 years ago. Especially Councilmember Gordon and Reich, have provided a lot of leadership for this even before those of us who got here last term were able to dig in. But I wanted to say that because part of it, what I think we're seeing is a lessening of fear about change in our streets. So as I've been in office here for 5 years, we know when we take out a lane of traffic or some parking or anything that's perceived to slow down car traffic, we get resistance. But I have gotten so much positive feedback for the protected bike lanes and the pedestrian improvements that have gone in my ward. In fact, my constituents are even just demanding more. So I think as we use this data-oriented approach, when we make the case for why complete streets are important, and when we're building them, even though there's still resistance to change and fear about change on particular projects, I think we're seeing the benefits and hearing the positive feedback of those safety improvements back from constituents. So we're doing the hard work of transforming a physical environment that has been built that way for decades, intentionally that way for decades. But I see a lot of positive momentum and a lot of positive feedback from constituents in a ward where, again, a lot of people walk and bike and take transit and really are so happy and excited to see us approaching their streets differently. So thank you to the department for all of that work. It's not easy. We've turned a ship pretty quickly here, I think, and we're starting to see the benefits and demand for more. It's a compliment.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation.
As evidenced by the conversation that was just happening, we're really well poised with this wealth of data through both our pedestrian crash study and now our Vision Zero crash study to dig into a new level of detail around community engagement, which will lead us to drafting up an action plan and finalizing it in the next year. This, as has been talked about in this conversation that's just been happening, is really an effort by a lot of different people, a lot of different players. And I think it's worth noting all the different city departments that are a part of this effort from a staff and department head perspective. It's Public Works, the City Attorney's Office, Police, Fire, Health, Communications, Civil Rights, the Intergovernmental Relations Office, Community Planning and Economic Development, City Coordinator's Office, and our Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. That's a huge amount of attention to this matter and speaks volumes about how serious the city is around this. And as we now go beyond that and partner with other local, regional, state partners, our community organizations, advisory committees, and importantly, the public, that we can also have intentional conversations with. We can use data, but we can also use the data we hear from them in terms of their narrative and how they feel on their streets. We're really poised to do a lot with this action plan, and we're in a really good place. There are 3 formal committees that are helping guide this work: the task force, which Director Hutchison mentioned, an advisory committee, and this includes different organizations, and I'd like to name some of them so you're aware of who's participating. This is Hennepin County, MnDOT, the Park Board, the Public Schools, Metro Transit, researchers from the U of M, the Committee on Aging, Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Bicycle Advisory Committee, the Public Health Advisory Committee, Our Streets Minneapolis, AAA Minneapolis, the Minneapolis High Rise Council, CLUES, the Native American Community Development Institute, the Downtown Council, ARP Minnesota, North Point Health, and additional community members from different perspectives. So we really are pulling together a whole group of people who see this as a singular, unique goal and are working hard to do something about it. Through those groups of people to date, we have landed on guiding principles to really deliver this action plan. And these principles will really guide those actions that we develop, the performance measures, how we judge success. And they are safety and human life first. With this, we assert that the loss of human life is unacceptable and that we're committed to ending this. We'll work with urgency, which is a theme we've heard throughout your comments here, to implement Vision Zero, as one death is one too many. Equity. We will recognize and work to eliminate racial, economic, and other disparities in traffic crashes, as well as our approach to our Vision Zero action plan. We will work to deliver fair and just outcomes and opportunities for all people. Data-driven. The Vision Zero strategies and actions will be developed from relevant data, recognize best practices, and community experiences and input. We will also work to improve the data we have and recognize its gaps. Accountability. We will set clear objectives and report on them regularly. We'll be transparent and include meaningful and diverse community engagement that helps guide those actions. We'll collaborate with community and agency partners to embrace, develop, and implement Vision Zero. And we will adopt our approach as needed in the future as we see opportunities for improvement. We've also developed a list of focus areas where we imagine developing strategies and actions around, and this will be refined as we go into more community engagement and hear from people in terms of what they think is important. But the themes we've heard to date include strategies and actions around street design and infrastructure, as well as managing speed, traffic speed on our streets, education around traffic safety. A large part of this is about communications and education and looking at, really changing the way we value time that was mentioned earlier, how we manage, how we value, the speed of a trip versus somebody's life on our streets. Using relevant data and improving that. And finally, traffic safety enforcement and striking the right balance in terms of how we can use that in a positive way to help reach our goals. And so it may not be that we have strategies and actions in all of these, but this is what we'll learn throughout the coming months as we continue our engagement and receive input. This work is being done in close coordination with our Transportation Action Plan, which we'll hear about shortly, in terms of the timeline, our engagement, communications around this. We'll have two separate products that align but are different, and safety really is a key goal of our Transportation Action Plan as well, and so this work will be woven together in a way that makes sense and really provides the urgency we need for Vision Zero, as well as the actions for our next 10 years of our transportation planning work. That's the end of the presentation. Happy to have any additional questions or comments.
Any questions per the wrap-up? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you. When will or how will we see your plan of communication during the community engagement section of this year?
Sure. So we have a new website, visionzerominneapolis.com, listed here. So our engagement events will all be listed there. We're happy to also, everything will be on our website. Our first piece will be our Community Connections Conference on February 2nd. We will be there as a team of Public Works staff talking about both Vision Zero and our Transportation Action Plan. There will be a series of different events that community open houses and community dialogues, organizational workshops that we can share those dates with the council offices and make sure that there's the opportunity to share that information with your constituents. Because we are looking for a lot of involvement and are happy for any support we can get in reaching more folks.
And then how might neighborhood organizations that want to engage their communities in these input sessions know about the hows and whys? Should we as council offices be sending them the link to your new website? I ask because almost any neighborhood and neighborhood organization kind of has their list of problem areas and sections and streets, and I think that they're eager to put all of those things on the table in and through this process, but we need to meaningfully engage them through the neighborhood organization so that they feel part of this work too.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Chair. We are working on really detailing out the next phase of engagement. We know some pieces of it, and those pieces will be on our website, and we're also continuing to to develop our engagement plans. So noting your comments around neighborhood organizations, we will make sure that we have a process that fully, that is able to connect with those different organizations, because you're right, they have
a different reach. They don't have
Sure.
full reach, but they have
Yep.
a different reach.
Mm-hmm. And knowledge of different streets and corridors and whatnot. So definitely, as we are communicating, we're working with our communications team and getting information to the council offices. We'll ensure that, highlighted where those voices are easiest to tap in, but we will also have just general public meetings and whatnot too. So there's going to be multiple opportunities to engage. We'll make sure that it's easily understood.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, seeing none, I will just make a final comment. Clearly, we had a really great presentation, and the data was there to not only sort of explore what we see in this information, but it already generated a lot of conversation and insights in terms of what we can do for further analysis, and of course on our way to strategies of implementation, resource prioritization, and all the things that follow and direct the work moving forward. But I think that sense of urgency that comes from the data before us, I think we got to keep that both formally and informally through our actions and our words, to keep that there, because that will keep that centrifugal force, that will keep that range of internal partners or in departments, and then also the external ones, because there is where the solutions will lie. And I think that's where this is a different approach, in the sense that who's at the table and how they're at the table and why they're at the table. And I think that will be one of the things that we want to continue. But I don't think it's just a matter of urgency for solving problems. I think it's been touched on in the commentary just here today. This is really a way to say this is a pivotal moment. how these sorts of questions and this type of right-of-way now is actually public space. And with that, that sense of safety, but also that promise of the communities that we really want to live in, that we can pivot to that sensibility and that sort of vision. And I think it's just that other element of not urgency, but also the promise of great communities, and who doesn't want to get behind that? So I think this is a foundation, and I can't wait to move forward with the work before us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we now can move to item 7, the Minneapolis Transportation Action Plan update.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, as we transition from our Vision Zero data discussion and into our Transportation Action Plan, I do want to recognize that Director Corbel from Civil Rights joined us midway through our Vision Zero presentation. She is she's fiercely loyal to this effort and has provided really amazing input to the task force and to us, and I thank her for being here to support our effort. Our next agenda item is related but separate to Vision Zero. It's an opportunity for me to say that for Vision Zero, we are not going to be able to address every single comment that comes in from the community. We have a goal of eliminating death and serious injury on our streets, and we'll do that first. And the Transportation Action Plan is an opportunity to continue to have broader discussions about what our streets need to be and why, to Mr. Chair's point about being places for people, here is where those discussions really unfold. So I'm going to introduce Kathleen Mayel. She's supported by multiple teams on multiple topics, and by Director Hager, who has put countless hours into putting this forward today. Today is an important day for the Transportation Action Plan. Unlike Vision Zero, it doesn't have a resolution. It hasn't had a community conversation about it. It is a newer effort, and we're excited to present that to you today. I know a few of you have been anxiously awaiting the new name, and the new name is the Transportation Action Plan, also known as Go Minneapolis. So with that, I will ask Kathleen Mayel to take it away.
And before we go to that item, I should do the formal action. So before us, item 6, we have a receive and file. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, and now we can proceed to number 7. Thank you.
Good morning, Kathleen Mayel, Supervisor, Transportation Planner, Transportation Planning and Programming Division. Happy to be back here, really with what is a really exciting day for the Transportation Action Plan. I'm going to cover broadly what is the Transportation Action Plan, what is the relationship to Minneapolis 2040, as well as the Vision Zero Action Plan, give an overview of the goals, topics, the committees, the timeline, what engagement looks like, and what our next steps are moving forward. Minneapolis Transportation Action Plan will be a 10-year action plan to guide future planning, design, and implementation of transportation projects for all people in all the different ways they move around our city. This plan will replace in full Access Minneapolis, which was developed between 2007 and 2011 and had different iterations and updates throughout 2017. The components of Access Minneapolis are the Downtown Action Plan, the Citywide Action Plan, the Pedestrian Master Plan, the Bicycle Master Plan, the Streetcar Planning documents, and then our Street and Sidewalk Design Guide. Whereas those were done sequentially, all of this will be together as one in our Transportation Action Plan. The Transportation Action Plan is really comes after Minneapolis 2040 and really speaks to one of the 11 topic areas within Minneapolis 2040, being transportation. Minneapolis 2040 really established the what we are trying to achieve as a city with transportation, the vision. It covers 20 years of an outlook, whereas the Minneapolis Transportation Action Plan will establish how we plan to achieve that vision over the next 10 years. There are 24 transportation policies within Minneapolis 2040, which will be addressed with our Transportation Action Plan through 7 different topic areas and the development of strategies and specific actions within those to get toward that vision of Minneapolis 2040. In terms of the relationship with the Vision Zero Action Plan, again, this is a coordinated approach between the 2 planning processes. The Minneapolis Transportation Action Plan is a 10-year planning document, whereas the Vision Zero Action Plan will detail out the next 3 years of actions. Again, we will have those transportation-specific strategies within 7 topic areas in the Transportation Action Plan, whereas the Vision Zero Action Plan really looks beyond just your traditional transportation pieces, perhaps, and looks more closely in terms of communications, legislative actions, education, enforcement, engagement, and is led by a citywide task force of different departments throughout the city. The Minneapolis Transportation Action Plan will be guided by 6 goals to implement all of the policies set in Minneapolis 2040, and these goals will really guide the decisions over the next 10 years. The first is climate. We aim to reshape the transportation system to address climate change using technology, design, and mobility options to aggressively reduce greenhouse gas emissions caused by vehicles. In terms of safety, we aim to reach Vision Zero by 2027 by prioritizing safety for all people and eliminating traffic fatalities and severe injuries. Equity. We plan to build and operate a transportation system that contributes to equitable opportunities and outcomes for all people. Prosperity. We plan to provide mobility options that move people and goods through reliable connections. We plan to retain top talent and grow Minneapolis as the economic engine of the region. Mobility. The goal is to embrace and enable innovation and advancements in transportation to increase and improve mobility options and access for all people. And active partnerships. We know that we can't do this alone. We plan to seize opportunities to achieve shared goals and responsibilities through partnering and leveraging funding opportunities with national and regional partners and others who want to invest in the city. So these are the 7 topic areas that will be developed, that we'll be working within for the Transportation Action Plan. They are advanced mobility, pedestrians, bicycle, transit, freight, street operations, and street design. And to get into a little bit of what that means, with advanced mobility, we're really looking to approach advancements in transportation in a way that we most quickly and thoughtfully use the advancing technology within the transportation realm to help us meet our goals. We want to plan for future changes and ensure that technology changes in the transportation world are happening. We're planning with them, we're planning for them, and they're not happening to us. So we'll really focus on 4 different types of advancements in transportation. Those are shared fleets, things like vehicles that you can temporarily use, scooters or cars or bicycles, electric vehicles, no matter the vehicle, be it car, scooter, bicycle, connected infrastructure and connected people. This is different systems talking to each other and helping us hopefully reach our safety goals more quickly. And then the automation of transportation, things like self-driving cars. So that's what the focus area of our advanced mobility topic will be. In terms of pedestrians, we have seen through our annual city counts more and more people walking in the city. And at the same time, as was highlighted through our Vision Zero crash study that was just presented on, pedestrians are overrepresented in our fatal and severe crashes, representing nearly 1/3 of all of those crashes. So our goals here are really to develop strategies and actions that increase the safety and comfort of those walking and creating a pedestrian priority network to help focus some of those strategies and actions in places that will be most effective and really allow walking to be seen as an option for people to get around and not have the fear and other things that were talked about in the prior conversation around safety and feeling like this is an option that people can use to get to where they need to go. Similarly, within the bicycle topic, we'll be looking to improve safety, particularly through the development of a low-stress, all ages and abilities network where there are greater opportunities for bicyclists to feel comfortable largely through more separation and distance from the traveling cars. We'll also be looking to integrate low-powered vehicles into this network of what we talk about as bicycle lanes now. We've seen a proliferation of scooters and electric bikes and whatnot. So how do we normalize different ways to get around and create space for them within our streets? So these are some of the non-infrastructure initiatives we'll be looking at. Nearly half of the trips that we take in Minneapolis are under 3 miles, and this is a huge opportunity if we are able to create this low-stress network to be able to increase the amount of people who feel comfortable and want to bike and reach really our climate goals and our other goals more quickly. Minneapolis has a big role in making transit work. We see transit as a key part of reaching our climate goals. So the goal here is really to look at increasing ridership, and the way we can do that is through increased reliability, convenience, and comfort. In 2016, approximately 18% of the households in Minneapolis did not have access to a vehicle, and so transit is a really key part of the conversation when you're talking about access to opportunity. There are 250,000 transit trips that begin, end, or travel through Minneapolis right now. And we know that as Minneapolis continues to grow, transit will want to provide an even larger part of how the people in Minneapolis get around. And so figuring out how we can support this growth in ways that is attractive to a transit rider, that gives access to those without cars, and that helps us, again, always going back to how we can reach our goals within these topics, how we can reach our climate goals, how we can reach our mobility goal. Transit is really a place where we're going to be focusing energy there. And so this is really a little bit different than the Access Minneapolis work around transit. This is looking at all types of transit and really looking to identify the cities, how we as a city can help play a critical role in moving this forward.
Question, Councilman Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This might be an overall question, but particularly to the transit piece, we got the opportunity to have the Hennepin Avenue bus-only lane pilot, and it was really popular in the ward. I frequently get questions from my constituents about when is it going to be made permanent. And then recently, the news came out that through Metro Transit that it sounds like it's not going to be in the near future, that instead of implementing specific projects, we're going to take a more citywide view of doing more bus-only lane pilots. And I just wonder kind of how we're going to balance the opportunities for specific improvements that will make a really big difference in people's day-to-day lives versus taking a planful citywide approach, which both are important, and knowing that this plan will take the next year plus to get adopted. I think, again, kind of to the earlier theme, being thoughtful and planful, but also kind of maintaining that sense of urgency and really making sure that, especially in places that are growing, have recently grown, where people are relying on transit, where there's huge opportunity for mode shift to transit, that we're doing everything we can to help make the service as the best it can be.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender answering from the side here. Transit has been a very robust topic, especially over the last couple of days with this new information that was shared publicly about the Hennepin Avenue bus pilot lanes. We thought it was a tremendous success, and we agree that they should be made permanent. The question is more when and not if at this point. And I want to just give a little bit of context too, that through our work on the American Cities Climate Challenge, we will be piloting about, a number to be determined, about 4 more. And so we sort of have a choice to go all in and make one permanent, or to continue to pilot in multiple neighborhoods of the city. And we're excited about that piloting. We're not going to wait for the adoption of the action plan. We're going to learn so much by piloting that will feed right into the action plan. And I will just say this a little bit off the cuff right now, that we're listening to the feedback right now on the Hennepin discussion, and we're going to meet very soon to talk about what might be possible. Do we need to rethink the strategy? Do we want to stay the course? Do we want to just take the feedback and think about it a little bit more, and we'd be happy to follow up with you on it.
Okay. the fifth topic is freight. And as our city continues to grow, we'll anticipate a growth in freight as well. Around the state, freight is expected to grow by 40% by 2040, and we anticipate to see similar levels within the city. More and more purchases made online and delivered to our homes play a key role in this freight movement as well. And so we're looking to learn how technology and looking to harness this in terms of these last mile deliveries as well, how other cities are experimenting with drones and delivery lockers and delivery robots, to make these deliveries more efficient. And so we're looking to integrate that into how we think about freight, everything from the really large trucks and what impact they have on our streets and street design, down to a smaller delivery vehicle, non-motorized cargo bikes, you name it. We're trying to see how we can better and more efficiently get freight deliveries throughout the city. Street operations. The key here of this topic is to look at how does this all come together on our street platform. We have a certain right-of-way, a certain amount of the street that the city really holds in public trust for the public to do what is best for the public good. And so there's a lot of competing demands within here. We're looking for efficient travel, but we're also looking for places and streets that really contribute to a sense of a neighborhood and to people being there, walking, staying in a space, in a parklet, you name it. So 22% of the land area in the city are our public right-of-way, and so we are looking to integrate our policies of complete streets, our Vision Zero, and our climate goals into the daily operations and systems planning on our street. So we'll be looking to create strategies and actions around providing options within this limited right-of-way. And then finally, our street design topic area. And the emphasis here really is on serving people, maximizing that limited space into a public asset for people, and supporting movement. We are recognizing the consequences of, decades of street design choices which favored the automobile, and that the city has, since the last design guide, which was published in 2008, adopted a climate action plan in 2013, a complete streets policy in 2016, a Vision Zero commitment in 2017. So we anticipate seeing themes of those planning and policy documents to filtrate into our new street design guide to reflect those priorities. And really with a goal of helping normalize and make transit and walking, biking, using shared fleets an easier option for people as they move about our city. The Transportation Action Plan has a number of committees that are helping advance the planning work, a policy advisory committee to help provide policy guidance and direction of the effort, a steering committee which is comprised of Public Works division directors, as well as CPED, the Director of Long Range Planning as well, to help guide the overall plan update and give major direction and decisions along the way. We have an interagency technical advisory committee where we are working with our partners at different, MnDOT, Hennepin County, Metro Transit, involving them in the creation of this, as we recognize that it will take partnership to reach our goals. And we've had a series of topic-specific work groups that have helped us tee up our information that we plan to use with our coming engagement as well. So in 2017, we came to this committee and we presented an assessment of Access Minneapolis, and that really started us off on our initial work with this plan, which was gathering where we've been, where we're gathering the data, looking at current trends, and we spent 2018 understanding that context and really diving in deep to where we're at in terms of data and how people are moving around. We've done some kind of light touch engagement, again, at our open streets, understanding people's travel preferences. And we really now are entering into a new phase of a more public conversation where we're hoping to engage a lot more people in this conversation, get input on what their priorities are, which will lead us to a draft plan later this year, and again, aiming for a final plan in 2020. So the upcoming engagement opportunities, we have our Community Connections Conference February 2nd. That will be our first kind of big public event where we'll be having information on all our topic areas, as well as asking people about what success looks like for them. You know, in 10 years, will we have achieved success, you know, if we've done what different types of things with this plan. We're planning a series of community dialogues with different cultural communities, working with our neighborhood and community relations staff throughout the month of March. Some organizational workshops in late February or early March throughout the city, different community workshops or open houses in April. And importantly, we have this call for engagement services that will be live later today, where we're asking people, organizations, artists, neighborhood, different organizations, what can you do to help us span our reach and reach further into the community to be able to bring people together, hear people's input, and get their feedback. So that'll be open for 3 weeks. There are a series of small grants that we're looking to partner with different people throughout the city to expand our reach of engagement. Once we have the draft plan, we will anticipate doing another round of engagement later this fall. So here's really the highlight milestones of the coming year ahead. And we're looking forward to having people stay updated through our website, which is now live, go.minneapolismn.gov, following the conversation on social media with the Go Minneapolis, Go MPLS. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you. We'll start with Councilmember Gordon, followed by Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you very much. This is very exciting that we're starting to dig into this work. Thanks for helping to fill a void that we all experienced after December 7th. And we can get engaged in some stuff this year and make it just as exciting, hopefully. I'm a little bit curious about the policy committee and who's on that. I'm thinking that might be the place where there might be some city policymakers at the table, how often they meet, and who's on that.
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Gordon. Mr. Chair, our Policy Advisory Committee has our Council President Bender on the committee, TPW Chair Reich, Councilmember Warsami, our City Coordinator, a representative from the Mayor's Office, Abdi Salah, and David Frank from the Community Planning and Economic Development Department, Director Hutchison. And they are meeting quarterly. They have had 2 meetings to date.
Excellent. I appreciate that kind of information. One of the thoughts about this whole process is when will the touch points be, and would there be a reason for having the council and the mayor approve things in stages along the way? Sometimes that makes sense. I noticed that there are already goals that were identified in the plan, and I'm not sure exactly where they came from. They all looked good to me, but I know that sometimes that will help make sure things get included along the way and there's buy-in along the way so people can understand the next steps as it goes. So something to think about, or maybe you've already thought about that a little.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Mr. Chair, that is a great comment, and two points there. That one, I should have mentioned when I had that goals slide up, that those goals really are based on and aligned with, and you could think of almost a matrix with some of the comp plan goals, so the comprehensive Minneapolis 2040 goals. So we see those as coming from the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan, and we're not looking to reestablish vision or the goals of the city with this effort. We are looking to build upon what has already been adopted by the City Council and further tailor it for a transportation-specific purpose. So that is, I just wanted to make that point. Your point to should we be bringing things forward, for example, to adopt the goals, that is something that our Policy Advisory Committee also recommended this past week. And so we are looking to work and see what makes sense from that perspective. They brought it up as an idea as well. So I anticipate that we will be coming back to this committee with along the process to do just what you've recommended.
That must be an example of great minds thinking alike, because it sounds like that is an outstanding policy committee, and I appreciate my colleagues serving on that. There's a couple, one other thing. back to when you talked about the process with the comp plan, I think a lot of times in those discussions and conversations, we said, oh, that could go over there, that could go over there, let's not deal with it now. And so I'm sure there's a lot of things that we're going to want to pick up and see if we can, questions we can answer or things that we can settle through this plan. I noticed in the presentation, streetcars weren't explicitly mentioned, although we certainly have our streetcar plan, and so streetcars will be included in this plan.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon, Mr. Chair. Yes, we are really looking with this plan to broaden out how we think about transit, and that is not to say streetcar won't be a part of the plan. It's to say that we need transit that works in the city. We need, urban transit, and there's a whole suite of options that work. And so whereas in the past with access it was specific about streetcar, what we're looking to do with this plan is identify where we as a city think that there needs to be, say, more service or more reliable service or what have you, and then figure out what is the best mode to do that, what is the best piece of, thing that moves around to bring people. We've seen, different cities around the nation and around the world are experimenting with different things. So we certainly will be looking, and collaborating with Metro Transit and others to figure out what makes sense on our streets to get people to make transit an option that people can use.
I appreciate that, and I really like the idea that we're willing to expand into transit a little more. We may have our own ideas about where stops go, where VIT lines should go, and those kinds of things. And so, and I think this would be a great way to help leverage some of that. Just the other last specific thing that I'm worried that we could miss here, I get more and more pressure from some of my constituents about getting car-free streets. We happen to have in Ward 2 a Milwaukee Avenue that got rebuilt without cars on it, and some people wish they could maybe have a bike boulevard without cars on them, and we don't really have a process. We haven't figured out how to actually identify those or when it would make sense, when it wouldn't, how do we make the decisions and all of those things. And I thought complete streets might help us get there. It maybe helped us move slightly closer. So I just wanted to at least flag that as something to think about. I know we've also tried to put a bike greenway without vehicles through North Minneapolis, and it's been a hodgepodge and a challenge, but I think we're making progress there. So people will start to look at that, what makes sense and where doesn't it go. So just as we look at our network, identify that would be helpful. Enough.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I suspect you'll probably already be doing this, but I look at my neighborhood associations and each has a transportation committee, and oftentimes the most engaged folks in the community who have been pushing for improvements in transit are participating in those. And so if it's not already part of the plan, I suspect it is, but just explicitly reaching out to the neighborhood associations and encouraging their transportation committees to provide input and feedback, I think would be helpful. Thank you for the presentation. I think it was great.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be really brief. I think we're all really excited about this. I just wanted to note all the engagement the department has already been doing throughout the Minneapolis 2040 update, and seeing the department out at open streets, during those events, and doing really engaging activities. And, my kids were really excited to put the little pom-poms in their and the bins for which mode they wanted to use. And I think that's helped open up this plan to be more accessible and for folks in the community to get excited about imagining what our streets can look like. So I think this is a continuation of a lot of work that's happened over the past many years.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you for all the work. I echo the comments of my colleagues and definitely look forward to the different ways that we present this as we move along. I think there will be great anticipation of what's stated in those meetings per Councilmember Gordon's suggestion. So with that, I will move to receive and file. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries, and we are now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.